Hello, we are with Michael Berkowitz. He is the Executive Director of Climate Resilience Academy at the University of Miami, and he's the founder and president of the 100 Resilient Cities. Welcome, Michael, for being here with us and having this conversation.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So the first question that I want to make is, I would like to know, how did you become interested in issues related to climate crisis and also about cities? Because you told me before that you have a background in public policies, and I would like to know more about your interest in planning cities and resilience.
Yes, so I've been in disasters and risk and resilience my whole career. After university, where I was, as you mentioned, a political science major, I got a job as a journalist, and I started covering disasters. And through that job, I got recruited to join the New York City Office of Emergency Management. It's like civil defense here. And that was through the mid-90s to the mid-2000s. Lots of disasters in New York City during that time, including 9/11 and the Great Northeast Blackout and other disasters. And so from there, I went to the private sector, and I had a job in risk management and crisis management for Deutsche Bank, helping the bank understand all of its physical and non-financial risks. And through that, I was recruited to start the 100 Resilient Cities. And so I began to understand all of the different kinds of crises that are out there, whether those are climate crises like flooding and storms, or seismic shocks, or technology breakdowns, or public health emergencies like pandemics. All of those things have common elements, and those common elements are what we try to address as part of the study of resilience.
Perfect. So climate crisis is one of these, different crises that you have been studying and understanding, I can see.
Yeah, and sorry, just to say, I mean, the climate crisis is an incredible disruptor, because climate is, there are so many different first and second order impacts of the climate crisis. So it will mean more rain or less rain. It will be more heat or changing patterns of weather in different ways. It will be bigger storms. It will be more frequent storms, all of those things, but it will also be the changing economic patterns. It will be migratory crisis, many other different things. And so looking at all of those kinds of vulnerabilities together is very interesting.
Yeah, and also, as you were mentioning, there are very different kinds of impacts, some longer term, some shorter. So this is my next question. It might be difficult because what are the main challenges cities face to be resilient? I know there are many, so could you pick some of them, maybe in your experience in Miami or here in Santiago, for what you know?
One of the core challenges that cities face related to climate and resilience is working in integrated ways, in interdisciplinary ways. Cities, like other big organizations, actually like universities and the big private sector companies as well, organize themselves in sectorial ways so that they can be efficient. Engineers talk to engineers, architects talk to architects, economic development people talk to economic development people, immigrant migration and social service people work on their issues. And one big challenge that cities face in order to get ready for the climate crisis is how to integrate those more effectively. And because climate shocks challenge us across those sectors and silos in really meaningful ways. And so not only are there risk factors that we have to be accounted for, if we're only thinking about the built environment, or only thinking about transportation and mobility, or the economic sector, we're going to miss risk factors. But there's also an opportunity if you work in interdisciplinary ways. We call that the resilience dividend. You could call it triple bottom line or something else, where if I'm thinking about a particular project, say when we worked with Paris and they were working on greening their interior schoolyards, that's one thing. But if you think about it in other, not just about greening a particular small parcel of land, but how you might involve the community with that, how you might make those assets available to migrants and immigrants who just arrived in the area, how you might involve children. Then you can start to get the resilience dividend benefits in multiple different ways, but that's hard. So that's a big challenge. I would say the second thing is a second challenge that cities have is this issue of equity. Equity shows up in so many different ways, and particularly related to the climate crisis. People are most vulnerable to heat, to flooding, to storms. And what's hard about that is not only does the first disaster impact those historically disadvantaged communities more severely, but it creates even further inequities. And so that starts to compound itself. And so that, I think, as the climate crisis accelerates, is going to make urban living and response to that even more difficult for some communities. And that, I think, is another massive challenge.
Yeah, great. So working together, trying to work with different sectors, disciplines, and with communities, and also inequity. So those are the big challenges that you mentioned.
Can I one more?
Yeah, one more. Another one.
So one last challenge that cities and all of us associated with cities, it's not just the regional government or the municipal government, it's all of the institutions that make up a city, civil society, the private sector, and so on. We get very focused on outcomes. Did we build the building? Did we make the road, the cycle lane, the hospital, all of those things? What we're starting to learn in the resilience space is not just what the outcome is, but how we got there. Did we get there in accountable ways, in community-led ways? Did we get there in integrated and inclusive ways? How did we act to actually build the thing, put the policy in place, whatever the intervention is? Because that how is also building this muscle of resilience. The more, just for an example, the more community-led a particular project is, whether the outcome you think is technically good or suboptimal, that community builds a muscle of working with itself, of leading, of making decisions. And when the next crisis happens, whether that's a flood or a heat wave or water shortage or drought, then the community is empowered and enabled in a way that allows it to survive and thrive in the face of that challenge. And so it's not just the what we do, but how we do it. And I think it's a huge challenge to all of us to conceptualize that. We measure ourselves by the what, less by the how. And so I think that's another way we need to change our thinking to adapt to the climate crisis.
So how we implement the programs, the projects, and working with communities, because of course they are really important in bringing everything together there.
Correct.
What things do you think we don't know and we should do more research about regarding these challenges?
One thing certainly related to one thing that we can do much more research about related to the built and natural environment is all of the intended and unintended consequences of the infrastructure we build. Too often you can see it in so many different pictures from this region and across the world, really, where planners will build a highway and on the one side is the slums and the other side is the formal city. And so the highway serves its purpose in that it took cars from point A to point B, and yet it has all these unintended, or maybe you intended consequences. But how do this is where we need more research and more data and more innovation. How do we better capture those consequences, both the positive and the negative? I've just given you a big negative example, of course, a highway with its, division, its air pollution, its social isolation, all of these things. But you could think of a good thing, a park, bioswale, a set of street trees, any kinds of other sort of urban infrastructure, if we just think about the one intended consequence for street trees, maybe it's to reduce the urban heat island. But street trees have so many other benefits. They improve mental health and physical health and cognition and the way we recover from injuries and surgeries. There's a mounting school of evidence about all of the benefits of street trees. What we need to do is figure out how we both capture that value, and I would argue, and this might be a very American approach to it, but how we monetize it.
Yeah.
So we can talk about and quantify the value in terms of money. And that will have the effect of pushing money into the things that are good for our communities, make us more healthy, sustainable, cohesive, and resilient, and pushing money away from things that don't do that. And so I think we're starting to get better at understanding the value. We've heard at this conference and others about all the evidence base of some of this infrastructure. I think the next step is to figure out how we create financial products or tools that can better capture all of those values in meaningful ways.
Yeah, I can see maybe building different scenarios for the projects. So how they create a new reality scenarios or models, maybe that can show us what the impacts are going to be regarding those project programs.
I think that's 100% right. I think between AR, augmented reality, and VR, virtual reality, and big data and AI, we may be on this cusp of beginning to better understand all of the impacts of the interventions we do and the things we build. And if we can better understand all of those impacts, it's like behavioral economics a little bit, then we'll be able to better account for the values and the both positive and negative in a meaningful way.
So in your experience with the University of Miami or the 100 cities, the 100 Resilient Cities project, what are some examples or innovative practices that we can share?
One is, I think there's a real power in place-based work. So better having outcome-oriented goals for a particular place. We are trying to improve the health outcomes in this area. And that is something that is able to bring a number of different stakeholders with different points of view to the table. If you do it in the right way. I mentioned the Paris example of greening schoolyards, where it started with trying to reduce the urban heat island, but it spread to they had a number of different outcomes that they were trying to monitor. So I think the work in place-based work, Rotterdam is another good example. In the integrated ways they think about water infrastructure, not just that the infrastructure captures water, but all of the social and economic benefits that a particular water park or water square or dike or levee can bring to a community. I think that integrated approach is something that's really interesting. I also think one other example of that integrated approach is not as place-based, but and we're seeing this at the University of Miami, beginning to string together different kinds of innovation across a value chain. I'll give you an example. So we have in our engineering department at the university, engineers who are working on new kinds of cement and concrete. As you may know, cement is one of the most polluting materials. But this innovation is looking at low carbon and in fact, even carbon negative. It captures the carbon as part of the process, carbon negative cements and concretes. At the same time, we have folks in architecture and engineering thinking about new kinds of designs. And this is for coastal protection infrastructure. designs that mimic reefs, reef structures. They're very good. They because they're made of cement, we put them in the water, they immediately start to reduce the impact of waves and sea level rise, storm surge and sea level rise. But at the same time, they're very good for growing marine life, corals, mangroves, seagrass, oysters, in a way that will give you the benefits of all the ecosystem services, healthy. And then connecting those, we have some researchers, I don't know if your audience will have followed this, but the coral reefs are in big trouble because they're very sensitive to marine heat waves. One of the things that we've begun to understand, though, are that some corals actually survive those heat waves quite well. And so we're working to engineer new kinds of heat-resilient corals that can be planted on these hybrid artificial reefs and actually provide some of the services and now there's lots of innovation that needs to happen there. It's we've grown heat-resilient corals, we have this structure, but doing it at a scale is very hard. And then finally connecting that to the economists who can better capture the value of having ecosystem services in the water as opposed to just a concrete structure. And to me, that's an example of what needs to happen and more broadly in all of our institutions. How do we connect everything from the folks thinking about the materials through the design to the nature-based solutions to the economics, so we can put all that together? Until we do that, we're never really going to be able to have impactful solutions for the impacts of climate change.
So innovation with an impact only will happen if we work with different disciplines together, like putting on the table everything that we know and when we have, but working together.
Correct.
So I'm going to go to ask my last question. What do you think the future generations of architects and planners should include, should learn, should study? What should they do because they are going to build the cities of the future?
Yeah. So, this might be, this will be a little bit redundant from everything I've talked about so far, but I would say at least two core parts of the architects of the future. One is to really work in more interdisciplinary ways. I can even see it and I'm most familiar with the architects in America, although I've spent time around the world, that the landscape architects, who often are the ones who are working in this, not just with the structure, but in this interstitial place, are the ones who are have the best perspective to do interdisciplinary work. And so I think one thing is, and we've progressed, as you probably know better than I do, and certainly your students probably experience as well, we've progressed over the last 20 or 30 years from architects just thinking about the structure to thinking more broadly. And I think that's going to have to be one really important thing. I think the second is this nature versus the built environment. It's not just versus, right? Yeah. Nature and the built environment together is going to be a really important, whether that's biophilic structures mimicking nature in some ways, or actually working together with nature. This is something that we're seeing lots and lots of innovation in many different ways. And I think that's going to continue. And if the changes I talked about, changing the economics of how we build, begin to take effect, then you will see the demand from clients and investors and all kinds of folks who want to see that. So I would say those two are going to be important. And then I'll add one more, the third, which is we all know architects who are, we call them in English, darkitects. These, bigger than life personalities who, demand their vision be accounted for in this way or that. And I think more resilient communities are going to be built with inputs and participation from many different people. And so, this will happen at various levels through various different functions at an architecture firm. But I do think that more kinds of substantive input is going to be really, really important in the future. And not just tick box, I did a community meeting, but really figuring out, and that doesn't mean you have to only listen to the community, of course. On the end, the client and the architect will make the decisions about the project. Being able to, in the best and most respectful and inclusive way, say, we heard, we did, here's why, and provide that kind of context. I think those are going to be the most successful architects going forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael, for your time. And we are very happy to have you here, and enjoy the rest of your stay in Santiago.
Great. Thank you.